Episode 11, discussing Game of Thrones, The Winds of Winter. There's some potential spoilers in this conversation, especially toward the end, so you are warned. Just quickly, last episode we made a mistake. We were talking about Victarion Greyjoy, who's not in the show, and we called him Euron a couple times.
Especially me.
Especially Kate. So if you go back and listen, the Greyjoy who semi-converted to the Lord of Light and who showed up in Meereen is Victarion, not Euron. He's not in the show, so I don't know that it matters for our listeners, but there you go. Got to correct our mistake. Now let's move on to this episode. Very, very good episode. I think that the show is best when it's closing the divide between television and movies, and this felt like a movie for sure. Everything, the way it was directed and the new style of music and everything was very cinematic and very just big.
Yeah. The
director, I can't remember his name, Miguel, I don't know how to say his last name.
Sapochnik or something.
Sapochnik. I hope that guy's got a bright future in whatever he wants to do, because he deserves it. He did the last two episodes, the Battle of the Bastards and then the Winds of Winter. Both episodes are near perfect 10s on IMDb's rating system, which is maybe the highest that any Game of Thrones has had. I think Hard Home was the previous top, but they've been passed up by these two. So credit to them and to the show.
Yeah, I thought it was an absolutely fantastic episode. We were given something interesting every step of the way of the 69-minute longest episode so far. I like the directing, the pacing, the writing, the acting, the music, special effects, you name it. It was really good. Definitely for sure my favorite episodes from this season are The Door, Battle of the Bastards, and Winds of Winter here. I was super pumped and excited when this episode ended, and that's how I used to feel. Or just like I had a lot of emotions there. So like when The Door ended, I was like, oh man, I'm so sad about Hodor, but that was so good. Like I like feeling that way with Game of Thrones, and I was not getting that for a lot of these other quote unquote filler episodes where this was good.
Well, one of my big criticisms this whole season was how predictable everything was. Pretty much the only thing that I didn't expect was Hodor reveal. But I gotta say, I did not expect Cersei to be queened or Jon to be king of the North. So both those things happened in this episode. So I gotta modify my criticism a little bit because I didn't expect those things to happen. I saw the explosion coming. We talked about that in previous podcasts.
But that was fun though, because we didn't know for sure, and it was a fun twist, even though it was slightly predictable.
Right, so they laid that out, but yeah, her getting queened I didn't expect. So let's start with Cersei before she got queened. So we're in King's Landing. They did some nice directing with showing everyone getting ready for the trial and wearing different clothes. Right away, you notice the outfit Cersei's wearing is different than anything she's worn before.
She looks like a raven.
Yeah. So I don't know if she knew she was going to be queened in this moment of triumph, and that's what she was getting dressed for.
I think she did.
Yeah.
I think she planned, that's all what she planned, and I loved how that scene started out. I thought it was really fun direction of leading up to these big stuff, and I loved it.
So Cersei had her own Reigns of Castamere moment. That's the song about the Lannisters. It's about her father, Tywin Lannister, when he got rid of his enemies all in one fell swoop, and not in the Red Wedding. That was another time where he got rid of all of his enemies in one go. But the thing that put him on the map was what they refer to as the Reigns of Castamere. And Cersei pretty much had her Reigns of Castamere moment, taking out the Tyrells and the Faith Militant, the High Sparrow, and her Kevin Lannister, her uncle, who had been kind of pushing her around, all gone in one
Yeah, and also Pycelle is gone. Even though that happened separately, I mean, he was also someone that she despised, and that's similar to the books now. I gotta say, there's something eerie about all those children, or the little birds, as they're known as in the show and the books, how they're killing everybody for Qyburn.
Yeah, the kids are creepy, and with that creepy music, it was a nice scene. I guess at the end of this, we'll talk a little bit more about how it relates to the books. But the kids and the death of Pycelle are done by somebody else in the books, not Qyburn. But we'll talk about that.
But they're
later.
both dead now as of this plot point, and so that's matching up at least with that.
Yeah, they had to make way, get rid of the old to bring in the new. I think Qyburn is a really cool villain that kind of flies under the radar for some people because he's such a nice old guy. He comes across and speaks in a very caring manner. But,
yeah, even his face. He doesn't have like the sinister look. Like Charles Dance with Tywin. You know that man meant business all the time, which is why he was so perfect for Tywin. But Qyburn looks sweet on the surface.
Right, and he's described that way in the books, like something like your favorite grandfather or favorite uncle or something is the way he's supposed to look.
It makes him so much more dangerous, I think.
Yeah, he had no problems with letting those kids or orchestrating those kids to kill Pycelle so that he could become the Grand Maester. And if anyone doesn't remember, Qyburn can't officially be a Grand Maester because he was kicked out of the fraternity,
The Citadel.
But now he's in that position anyways, and he created the mountain. So assuming the mountain is kind of undead, whatever he is, Qyburn appears to have the power of semi-White Walker zombie creation.
He's kind of like a sorcerer or something.
Right. Kind of like, I wonder if the mountain is kind of like Benjen Stark. I hadn't thought about this till just now. I wonder if the mountain could get through the wall, theoretically. We don't officially know if he's dead or not, but he probably is.
And it's also something where, at least in the books, I don't know how clear this has been in the show, but he is a huge torturer in the books, like in the most sadistic kind of way. That people are means to an end for his research and what he's trying to accomplish. And
Qyburn, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Totally. He's doing all sorts of sinister experiments. And the mountain is a really bad guy, too. Even before he went full zombie, he had been married a couple times and his wife's died under strange circumstances. I think it's implied he killed his father. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And then he burned the Hound's face. So he was a bad guy all around, and now he's got this undead power. And that poor nun lady is
Septinella
given to him as a gift, where I guess we can assume that he's just raping her, or who knows, maybe he's a weirdo, he's eating her fingers or something.
Oh, God, yeah. But I knew Cersei was going to come after her. I remember saying at some point that all those times, because she said more than once, that, the last thing you're going to see is my face before you die. And I talk a lot about when they put so much into the show, like they're purposeful with their scenes and dialogue, that was going to mean something.
Yeah, she delivered. I thought they might not follow up with that, but they sure did. They showed us how you don't want Cersei to get the better of you, because you're screwed.
Yeah, and and what we were just talking about with Qyburn, in the books they haven't shown this or in the show they haven't shown this with Cersei, but in the book she also is very willing to hand people over for torture and have them tortured to accomplish her own ends. I mean, she had an innocent man, a musician, very badly tortured in order to get Marjorie to be taken by the faith in the books. That's not out of character for her at all, and I don't think it's a shock to show watchers, but it's also something that really happens in the books.
Well, we've seen her for the last 2 seasons be on the receiving end, having punishment dished out to her. So now she's back in power in a big way. So before we talk about her queening, we'll just go to the explosion. I thought it was going to be bigger. It was it was a huge explosion, but it only took out the sept of Baelor, and I thought much more of King's Landing was going to go down.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm glad that it was only the sept, because now there's this whole piece of what about the rest of the wildfire, and how might that be used as a plot point, even if it's never used to detonate or anything like that.
Right,
but
she seems to have an insurance policy if there's a lot more wildfire to be able to take out King's Landing at any point, or take out... If there's ever an invader that she's losing to, it seems that she could just light the whole world on fire, which is kind of something she's capable of. Yeah,
and have another Reigns of Castamere moment, like get everybody in the city and then boom. I am curious as to how they kept it contained, because that is something that's really explosive.
Yeah, it's just a plot point to make the show go smoothly, I'm sure. They had candles. I wouldn't want to be the guy lighting those candles and putting them in the wildfire and hoping that the timing works out perfectly. So yeah, that's just for cinematic effect, I think. But it was done to good effect, for sure.
Well, it was done well. If you also wanted something to take time and not to be the one to die while doing it, there's, unless you have like a trigger person, that was their way of doing it, and it did work. Yeah. But, it's also very dangerous.
In the books, she hasn't done this yet, if she's going to do it. There's a couple foreshadowing moments. She's described a few times as having eyes as green as wildfire, which is a nice little hint by George R. R. Martin that something might be coming. She does light the Tower of the Hand on fire after her dad dies. She makes kind of a ceremonial show out of lighting this big tower on fire. So I'm trying to figure out how much is that happened in the show, because we're pretty far ahead of the books now at this point, is also going to happen in the books. And it may not happen exactly this way under this circumstances, but she's probably going to do something very similar in the books.
We'll talk a little bit more about Jaime here in a sec, but I think it could also be a plot point between them and their relationship, of her willingness to use the wildfire as well.
Yeah.
Because he was all willing to become Kingslayer to prevent the use of wildfire in King's Landing. Like, he took on that role for this very reason, and now she has just done that.
Well, we might as well go to Jamie right now. So that's a nice segue into Jamie. So Jamie shows up. He sees that the city's on fire. He must have known right away his sister was responsible. And then he rolls in and he sees her being queened. He didn't look too comfortable with it. No matter how much he loves her, I think he knows that is not the right person to be sitting on the Iron Throne.
Well, you said a couple podcasts ago when they had their loving goodbye when he went off to River Run that you thought that maybe because it was so loving the way it was done that maybe it was the last time they were going to do it. But maybe that is the last time that they're going to feel and act that way towards each other. He did not look super thrilled. She's childless now, and, having children and being a mother was what gave Cersei any bit of humanity. So what is Cersei going to be like now where she's childless?
Yeah, it's a pretty scary thought of how awful she was before. Especially she knows that she was responsible for Tommen's death. He killed himself as a direct result of Cersei taking out his wife and his religion and making him look like a bad king because under his watch, one of the pillars of the whole society was taken out.
Yeah, and I think she really did fail him. And she didn't seem as broken up about it as she did with the other two. And, it really is like she's lost everything now. And yeah, perhaps it's because she started realizing the prophecy that she got was true. But still, poor fragile little Tommen who just, he couldn't handle the grief of what happened. And also I think he tried as a king and failed. And in that moment, he just couldn't hold it. So he's such a tragic character.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that prophecy at the end of the episode because much of that prophecy was left out of the show. They only showed us half of it. So I'll give you fair warning when the spoilery stuff is coming up, but there's a lot more to that prophecy to talk about in Cersei's fate. But she has now lost all three of her children, and the Queen of Thorns, who we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to Dorne, has also lost her children and grandchildren. So rest in peace to the Tyrell family.
Yeah, I feel bad for Margaery. I really liked her character. I wanted to see more. I thought she had so much more potential. I think that she had a knack for doing the best she could in whatever situation she was in. She married three potential and two actual kings. And she married Renly, then Joffrey, and then Tommen. I mean, that's quite a feat. She did become queen. She managed to stay on top of Cersei. And even when the Faith kind of took over, she managed to try and get on top of that and still stay true to who she was. And I think she was in the midst of doing that, and it was just wrong place, wrong time.
I'm a little sad we're not going to see where her scheming was leading to, because she was good at playing in the game and she was starting to win over the High Sparrow, but we're never going to see what exactly she had planned. Every chance she had to control a king and be a real queen and everything always went wrong. And this one, it went wrong to her death, not just the king.
And it just goes to show that the High Sparrow, even though I think he was magnificent at playing the game, and he outmaneuvered some of the best, that he got too confident. He needed some more humility, which is kind of ironic given who he was. And it just goes to show that if you ever underestimate Cersei, this is what happens.
Right. It's hard to manage something that's completely unpredictable.
It's exactly what happened to Ned, though. He underestimated her, and he died for it.
Yeah, going back to Marjorie real quick, her last winning play was to get her grandmother out of town and to get the Tyrell army out of town. You called that well. You said, she wanted the Tyrell army out because she knew something was coming, and I was like, I don't know, whatever. But yeah, House Tyrell lives on, or at least Grandma lives on with a powerful army because of Marjorie's final winning play.
Well, and to be able to try and back the likely winning side of Dany, I think it's the last gift that Marjorie could give to her house, because I think she even said, I guess when the High Sparrow was interviewing her at one point, of that, family mattered most to her. And I think that's something that was true to her all along.
Yeah, so in the books, I suppose it can happen quite similar. Kevin Lannister is killed differently in the books. He's not exploded or anything, but he is dead at this point in the books. And then Loras, at this point in the books, we don't actually see it happen, but we're led to believe that he is doused in hot tar while he's sieging Stannis' castle of Dragonstone. Stannis is not there, of course, he's in the north, but Loras is so upset about Renly that he volunteered to lead the charge on Dragonstone to take back the castle from Stannis, and Stannis is having the castle mined for dragonglass, because there's a ton of dragonglass on Dragonstone, and he knows that will kill the whites. So, and then in that siege, Loras gets doused in hot tar and is on his deathbed. So he's not being held for trial or anything. So that's pretty different from the
And
from
again,
the
this
books.
is all like hearsay. Like it's not from a point of view person. It's more like someone in King's Landing gets a message of this, and this is how we find out about it.
Right, exactly. That's a device that George R. R. Martin uses a lot. We hear through the grapevine somebody's fate, and it turns out that the information is not correct. Which, of course, that's how it would be in a medieval type society. You know, you're playing telephone from one horseman to another through the Raven, blah, 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 blah. And the show does it a little bit too with the fake out deaths, like the Hound wasn't really dead, and there's other characters we thought were dead that weren't. Davos. In the books, we thought Davos was dead, yeah. So anyway, so the show does a little bit too, but it's different than in the books, because in the books we're like straight up told that Davos was killed, and then we come to find out later that that was a fake out and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So, but probably, at least through the grapevine, Loras has been very badly damaged in a fight. That's King's Landing. Anything else there?
No, I think we've really covered a lot in terms of just for that piece. I think we're going to come back to some other things at the end as well, but of what happened in the episode. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot that happened there.
Yeah, that was big triumph for Cersei, so nice job, Cersei. Okay, so now Old Town, just a short little scene where Sam shows up with his baby and his girlfriend. Really not very well thought out plan. I don't know where he put his extremely valuable 1,000-year-old sword, but that's somewhere not with them.
Yeah, I mean, how awkward would he look walking around with that? So I guess I do buy the fact that he is hiding it somewhere. One of my praises for this season is the shots that we got, like a lot of the panoramic shots. There was one in Bravos that I really loved with Arya. I loved how we got to see River Run, how we got to see the Citadel here in Old Town. It's just, I've really enjoyed the scenery in some ways. Like, I know there's a lot of CGI, but I think they really work hard to find the right locations for these places. And I really want to praise them for doing such a good job of finding just the right locations. And then also just making it look just so awesome. I really enjoyed that.
Well, the point of the scene was basically to show us the Citadel, which I have to admit was much bigger and more advanced than I expected. I thought it even looked a little sci-fi-ish. They had the light shining through and reflecting off the mirrors and stuff. And there's a whole lot of books there. So one thing that's interesting about Westeros is, unlike Earth, it never industrialized. So on Earth, we have a few thousand years of history until, the 1700s when things started really moving fast. Westeros and Essos and whatever planet they're on there has thousands and thousands and thousands of years of history. So it's possible that they've been stuck at the same technological level for 10,000 years, and that's why they have so many books. It's not like on Earth where we had a relatively shorter time. So it's just, because I was trying to think about, like, how could this library be so freaking big? But that could be it. They just never progressed technologically. But it appears that Sam is going to learn some very important things at the Citadel. I think that was the point of showing us just how much information is in that place.
Yeah, I think it would be similar to like how much Arya learned in Bravos kind of thing, where it's going to really change the character and keep moving their importance to the plot forward.
Okay.
I do want to say, like, why did he bring Gilly and the baby to the Citadel? He already knows they're not allowed. What did he really expect? Of course they wouldn't let them in. And like,
I think they just wanted the comic relief scene, which was kind of funny, where he's like, well, just hang on a second, like.
Well, and like, there's still this part of me, as a mother, where like, he's still like a baby little toddler, where where's the food in the diaper bag and stuff? Like,
No, he should have left the baby at his rich estate in Hornhill, because the mother was there to take care of them. So it was, yeah, whatever.
And I think there's a little bit of irony about the Citadel, too, just in the fact that they, in some ways, seem so well informed with all these books and things like that, but yet they still didn't know that Jon Snow had become Lord Commander, and that was at least the last that most people would probably know in Westeros of that. And then also that Aemon died, and I know that Sam said that it happened rather quickly, but I just find it interesting that they're not more well informed to find stuff like that out.
Well, I guess the War of Five Kings has really disrupted the mail service in Westeros.
Yeah, probably. And then I also am just interested to see what the vetting process is to make sure that Sam is who he says he is, and how they're going to make sure that he's kosher to come in.
Yeah, they probably won't show us any of that.
Probably not. But that's all I have for there.
All right. So then where do you want to go next?
Let's do Marine.
Okay, Marine. So I guess the big thing we got is that Dario is staying and Tyrion is promoted to Hand of the Queen. So
And I gotta say, this is the Tyrion that I remember. I really enjoyed these scenes. I think Peter Dinklage just has a way of being able to nail Tyrion. He shows so much, just like Ian Glenn for Jorah Mormont, that he can show a lot of emotion just in his face without having to talk. And he was just given so much crap to do for most of this season that we didn't get to see some of that great acting. But here, I saw it again, but we also saw him being what he does best, and that's being an advisor to someone in power. He doesn't want to be in power himself, but he likes being close to it. We know this about him already, so he's hand again. It was so fun to see that and the emotion on his face when Dany pins him with that.
Yeah,
I really hope for happiness for Tyrion, and I mean, how he spoke to Dany about leaving Dario behind, I feel like he really knows what that means, just in terms of like what happened with Shay, that sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and you don't always get to carry your loved one or bring your loved ones with you.
Yeah, it was a good ploy to leave Dario behind for the sake of giving her more options in Westeros. I don't see Dario as a good ruler. I mean, this guy's a mercenary who, this new actor plays him a little more just kind of like an everyman. I thought the other actor was much more carefree. Like, nobody tells Dario what to do, and he kills his friends and stuff like that. I don't see the guy being the kind of mayor you want of a city, but I think it was just a way to remove him from the story, at least for now.
Yeah, I agree. And it just goes to show that, like, he said it, oh, did Tyrion tell you this? And, she's like, hey, I make up my own mind, which I think Dany does. But it also goes to show that Tyrion does have good advice. And he did say this to Dany, and she followed it. I'm finding myself thinking about the fact why did she feel nothing about this? They made a point to say that. Is this some foreshadowing of the Dany that we may come to expect in the future? Like, is she going to be more heartless?
Yeah, they've been dropping hints a lot that she's going to be what I've long suspected, a pretty ruthless arrival in Westeros. It's not exactly clear to me why Tyrion believes in her. Like, he said that he believes in her or something to that effect in the episode, and that's when she pinned him. The Hand of the Queen. And I don't think they've done a good job of explaining where Tyrion's faith in her comes from, except for maybe being awed by her beauty and her dragons and her ability to get stuff done. But basically, as soon as Tyrion showed up, she was gone, and then she's been back for a short amount of time and came and brought her dragons to do her dirty work. So the exact reasons why he believes in her, I'm not exactly sure that they did a good job describing. And will she be one of the crazy Targaryens or not? That's the big question. And with her force that's coming, you really hope she's not a crazy Targaryen, because she looks virtually unstoppable at this point.
Well, and she's got the Ironborn and the Dothraki on her side. Both are peoples who are very ruthless and do things as a way of life that she strongly disagrees with. How is she going to keep a handle on that? Clearly what happened in Meereen, how she tried to have justice, didn't work for her. Like, that is something that I'm intrigued to see later on, of how she's going to try and still be who she wants to be, given what she's got.
Right. In the very first season, when Khal Drogo's with the Dothraki, they take a town and then they rape the women, and that's their whole lifestyle. And even if she is the new Khal of all the Dothraki, 40,000 strong or however many it is, even if it's just 10% of them that are still doing their old ways, that's a whole lot of raping that's going to be happening in Westeros.
Yeah, and killing because I think when we've seen them sack cities, like, they kill the children and the old people, and like, it's...
Right, I'm just not going to buy it if...
It's carnage.
Right, if the Dothraki are like disciplined like the Unsullied, it's just not going to make sense. And one thing I didn't realize till I was reading up on it the other day is that the Dothraki and the Unsullied have a history against each other, which they have left out in the show, but there was some huge battle apparently where a small force of Unsullied took out a very large force of Dothraki at some point. So they probably won't get into the inner conflict in Dany's camp, but there would be some inner conflict, I think, almost certainly.
But she also is, they've all seen her use her dragon, so there might be an element here of like, hey, if we stray away, this could mean our lives. And so there might be just the right element of, okay, we can't do that.
Right, yeah, exactly. And that's a real political theory, is that if you have the strongest weapons of anybody else, you can keep all the smaller camps in check, and she certainly does. Even the White Walkers seem like nothing to me compared to the dragons. So if you have dragons, you can put everybody in order. And we've seen that when the first Targaryens came over to Westeros, they had 3 dragons, and they conquered everybody. The Lannisters, the Starks, everyone that was already there were taken out with relative ease by by the Targaryens and their dragons.
And I really believe that. Like, that's one of the things that I love so much about, like, last episode, the Battle of the Bastards, where the dragons are lighting up the slaver ships. Like, you could just see, like, no one stands a chance.
Yeah.
And so it was so cool to see that. I'd like to add that, like, that final scene, definitely the showrunners like to end their seasons with Dany, and they've done it again here. But the fleet leaving for King's Landing, it was such a cool shot, I thought. It just...
it was such a cool shot until we saw Varys there.
with his jetpack.
Yeah, he jetpacked all the way to Dorne and then back from Dorne. But, you know, if you look at the banners of the ships that are with them, you'll see Tyrell banners and Sunspear banners. So I think we can just give them some flexibility and say that it's been months.
Yeah.
We'll say that the Tyrells and the Martells, which is the Sand Snakes and all those goofs down in Dorne, they went all the way over to Essos, I guess, or they met somewhere and then they've all turned around and come back.
The Dothraki seem to be doing a lot better than everyone thought they would after all this time of all these reasons for them to never cross the...
Right. Their fear of the Great Black Salt Sea and the ocean horses or whatever seems to have vanished pretty quickly.
Yeah, they seem to be doing... Like, I was expecting to see a bunch of people, like, puking over the sides or something like that, but everyone seemed to be kind of doing okay, and the horses didn't care at all.
Yeah. But yeah, so Dany's got the Unsullied, the Dothraki, the dragons... the Queen of Thorns and House Tyrell, plus they brought Dorne back in the fold, so whatever army they had. I mean, Dany is pretty much unstoppable at this point. Remember that Tyrell's, the Queen of Thorns, she has threatened a couple times to cut food off from the capital. So what gives them their power is they're the farmers of Westeros, and they have all the grain and food and everything like that, and they sell it to all the other kingdoms and stuff like that. So she could just essentially starve out Cersei. So Cersei picked a really poor time to become queen.
Well, and that's Cersei's problem, is that she's really good at making some of these moves that she does. However, she also often underestimates her own foes. She underestimated the High Sparrow and things got as bad as they did. You know, she doesn't have any allies except for the Lannister army here. And I think she's going to keep burning bridges along the way. You know, in the books, like, they really kind of paint it where she started to be more and more, like, kind of drunk with power and things like that. And yeah, she's hasn't thought through, like, she just wanted to be queen. And she hasn't really thought through about you need allies in order to maintain that.
Well, yeah, I don't know that she wanted to be queen, though, because her being queen was dependent on Tommen killing himself, which I don't think she anticipated. And that actually, at the beginning of the podcast, we said she was going to just be queen. So I don't know. But either way, she doesn't even know about Dany. So at this point, she thinks her only enemy is probably the Queen of Thorns, who is a formidable enemy, but tied with everybody else, they're going to be really bad. But
yeah, I mean, I don't think she wanted to be queen when she killed all these people, but once she knew Tommen died, which happened very fast after this, without doubt, yeah, she wanted to be queen. And yeah, Tommen was going to be king if he survived, but she was still going to be behind all that.
Yeah, so that leads me to remember King Robert, way back in season 1 and book 1, had sent out some assassins to take out Dany, and he was right. You know, his wife, or if his child was still on the throne, or who he thought was his child, is going to be taken out by Dany, who did exactly what Robert was scared of. She grew up, she took over the Dothraki, and...
Well, but how do we know that wasn't going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because Khal Drogo wasn't really interested in the Iron Throne and was pretty clear to Dany about that. It wasn't until they tried to assassinate her while she was pregnant with the stallion that was going to mount the world that he got upset and said, fine, you attack us, we'll attack back. And that's when he said, we're going to go do this.
Right, but then he died and she had to re-earn the Dothraki all on her own. Her goal was always Westeros.
Right. Which is what made this scene so cool, because from what we have anticipated from the very beginning is finally happening.
Yeah. Something else, though, I think a little plot hole here, if I'm remembering correctly. When King Robert ordered that she be poisoned, it was Varys who set it all up, right? Jorah was Varys' spy, and Varys put out the order to have her killed. Not through Jorah, but Jorah ended up saving her through the poison. But supposedly Varys has been backing her secretly this whole time, or at least at some point in the show decided to back her. There's a little inconsistency there. And of course, in the books, Varys does not support Dany. He supports someone else, which we'll talk about at the end. I was thinking about that the other day, and I think that's kind of weird.
Yeah, I just have two last comments here for Marine. One, where do the dragons land when they're tired as they're crossing the ocean?
Yeah, they probably just take a little nap in the water.
That's what I'm wondering. Maybe they float. And my last one is Jorah. I don't think we've seen the last of him.
Yeah, there's no way we've seen the last of Jorah. In the books, he does not have grayscale. Grayscale is had by a guy named John Connington, who is the protector of another guy who claims to be Aegon Targaryen. Aegon would be the son of Rhaegar and Ilya Martell. So the Mountain killed Ilya. Is that her name? Ilya Martell?
Yeah, that's who Rhaegar was with. Okay.
So Rhaegar had 2 children with Ilya Martell that the Mountain killed. And that's when Prince Oberyn was like, you raped her, you murdered her, you killed her children. So her children were killed by the Mountain. And they've cut this entire storyline out of the show. But in the books, it's possible that one of her children survived. And he's a Targaryen and he's making a move for the throne. And that is who Varys is backing. That storyline was completely removed from the show. And it's unclear whether or not that person is really who he says he is. But anyways, his protector has grayscale. And they have just landed in Westeros. So they've transferred that grayscale story onto Jorah, which tells me that it's significant.
Right. Which might make sense now why they gave Jorah grayscale. Because I remember when they first did it, I was like, what? You can't do that? He doesn't have it in the books. And...
Right. So the ramifications of that is hard to say. He's still in Essos, but maybe he'll be responsible for massive infections, which would be really sad, or who knows. But I agree. It's certainly not the last we've seen of him.
We've already talked about Dorne here a little bit. There's not too much more to say. I think what I just want to add is that I really enjoyed watching Lady Olenna be, still awesome and very true to her character and put some of those sand snakes in their place. Like, I think it was just fun for viewers to watch, but that is also Lady Olenna's character.
Yeah, telling those 3 annoying characters to shut up is really good. I felt like that was maybe on behalf of the show watchers, so we didn't have to listen to them talk. They didn't risk any lines.
But I also think that's exactly what she would have done had that situation taken place. She would have been like, shut up. Like, do you matter? No, I matter. She matters. We're going to talk.
Yeah.
Like, as she said, let the adults speak.
So, yeah, no, and I'm glad that she survived. And, yeah, she's with Dany. They're all with Dany. So I guess we'll move to the twins. We had 2 scenes there, one smaller one bigger one. So the smaller one was Jaime talking trash to Walder Frey.
Yeah, I really like that because this shows more of the Jaime that's less black and white that I think that we like. And we haven't seen much of that Jaime for a while, where Lord Frey is supposed to be his ally, and yet Jaime clearly despises him and doesn't go through any effort to hide that. And I really kind of enjoyed to see him kind of put Lord Frey in his place.
Yeah, definitely the look on Jaime's face. He's always on the team of assholes. So he's with the Freys, and he's got to be thinking like, I can't believe that this is my side of the battle.
And maybe he
is. Yeah.
Maybe this is kind of like, maybe part of this scene is to show us and set the stage.
He looked like Chris Christie after he endorsed Trump. When Trump was talking and Chris Christie was behind him looking so regretful.
Are you comparing Trump to Lord Frey?
Well, I'm just comparing the decision of Jaime's sitting there being very regretful that they're on Team Frey. But then he gets looked at by that girl who we know is not that girl, or at least at some point became not that girl.
Who's Arya. Which you called right away when we were watching. You knew it was right away that was Arya. And I think this is a good segue into that piece where, I thought the revenge scene was super awesome. And I loved how they took elements from the book. So there's the story of the rat cook. And the show, there's a season or a quote from Bran Stark where he says, "It wasn't for the murder the gods cursed the rat cook or for serving the king's son a pie. He killed a guest beneath his roof. That's something the gods can't forgive." And basically the story of the rat cook is where there's a king or some lord who comes by where the rat cook is, and he ends up feeling offended, and he ends up serving the king his own sons in a pie. So that's a little bit different of what they showed in the book, where here they actually served Walder Frey, his own sons in a pie. But I love that kind of continuity here. And then the gods got very upset with what the rat cook did because there was the laws of hospitality and protection, which he violated. So then they turned him into this white rat who was destined to have to eat his own children over and over and over again.
Right. So it's one of those stories that becomes canon, like a fable that inspires real events, or maybe real events inspired the fable, which goes on to continue to inspire real events.
Right.
And
what Walder Frey did was so taboo with the Red Wedding.
So Walder promised protection to Robb and everybody by having them as protected by guest right, which is when you eat in someone's house, they can't come after you. And that's why the people at the Red Wedding didn't have weapons and were taken by surprise. So he got his comeuppance? Is that the word?
Comeuppance.
He got his comeuppance?
Comeuppance.
So he got that. And Arya looked very pleased with herself. Is Arya something to be feared? Like, should people who like Arya be afraid that she is not going to be likable by the end of the story?
Like, this was a very dark scene, even though that there was a lot of like poetic justice here. It was just also a very, very dark scene because Arya's character in the books is very, very damaged and traumatized by what she's witnessed and experienced. And most of the Arya we've seen for a while, they have shown us bits and pieces in the show, but at least Arya for a while has just been really badass. And the thing is like, okay, she can be badass, but she's also a really traumatized girl who only goes out. Now, violence is all she knows now. And I feel we're seeing a little bit more of this where she's still this young girl who's slitting this old man's throat and smiling about it and being so at ease and content with it. And we're seeing some of that darkness so much more clearly here, which I like that it's similar to the books with that way. But you're right. Is this something where how long can we continue to enjoy this, even though she's a Stark and everything she's been through? What makes her so different from some of the other characters that we don't like?
Right. And what if she kills someone that we do like? So I'll go over, I looked up the other day, her list of people she wanted to kill at her peak, that she named on the show. It was Joffrey, Cersei, Walder Frey, Meryn Trant, Tywin Lannister, the Red Woman, Beric Dondarrion, Thoros of Myr, Illian Payne, and the Mountain. So from that list, Joffrey's already gone, so she can't kill him. She just killed Walder Frey, so she got that one. Tywin's already gone, and Illian Payne has been cut from the show. The actor got cancer. He was the tongueless headsman who cut off Ned Stark's head. So he's been cut from the show, and not to come back. They did it out of respect, not out of disrespect. They just didn't want to replace the actor who had cancer. So remaining on this list is Cersei, who I could certainly see her killing, but maybe not. We'll talk about that toward the end. Meryn Trant, she has already killed. I forgot to list him. She could run into Beric Dondarrion and Thoros of Myr, who are with the Hound in that same area, around the twins in the Brotherhood Without Banners. And for her to kill them would be, I don't know. They obviously included those two guys on her list in the show, whether they're worth killing or not. So some little conflict with the Brotherhood Without Banners. It'd be interesting to see. She could kill Melisandre. Melisandre has been cast south toward Arya. And then there's the Mountain, who I just don't see her killing. Even if she sneaks up on him like she did with Walder Frey. Even if she's wearing Cersei's face, the Mountain might not be killable in that way.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, and then quickly, also, whether Arya is going to become a scary, bad character, where did she get that face from that she wore? Did she kill some girl to wear it?
I would say no. Like, I don't think that she's that far gone. She would just need someone who has died.
Yeah, well, somehow she got a young girl's face and wore it. But okay, so that's the twins.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we move to Winterfell, but like we were talking last episode of like, we're not quite sure of what's going on with Jon and Sansa and if there's a rift there. But Arya she's so close to Jon and there's a lot of love there, and she was never close to Sansa. So I feel like if something were to come up with there, that Arya would definitely back Jon over Sansa there. But it's also something where in some ways where I was watching something in regard to Sansa and some of her arc from last episode, where she did the same thing that Arya did here, where she put Ramsay to death and he says, "Oh, I'm a part of you." There's this piece where it's like she's doing something that Ramsay would do. She's having someone be eaten alive by hounds and smiling about it. And that is very something that Ramsay would do. It's not something that Ned Stark would do, who he would do something honorable and just behead them himself. I hope that they don't have both these Stark girls go the same way.
Right, yeah. It's funny, when you watch the show, you can get so much bloodlust to see the bad guys taken out that you forget that these otherwise nice, innocent people or whatever are doing terrible things.
And I don't mean to say that neither of them should be unaffected, and I can buy Arya's storyline, like her personality already fit this right away, but Sansa's does not.
Right. Ned would never take pleasure in torturing even the worst person.
Right.
But Sansa did. And
so I enjoyed Ramsay's death, but if it means at the cost of Sansa, then I didn't.
Right. So
anyway, but that's a nice segue here into Winterfell.
Yeah, so it takes us to the north where Jon forgave Sansa / thanked Sansa for bringing the Knights of the Vale. I would have been a little more pissed. It would have changed the whole battle strategy, but whatever. Even if it took him an effort, he made the point. We need to trust each other, and we have so many enemies, so...
Right. This is kind of one of my biggest criticisms of the episode here, was just the fact that she does say, "Oh, I should have told you," and he really takes her apology so quickly and easily. I didn't buy that would have gone over that easy. Like, he still could have been like, but we have to get along and all of that. So, okay, whatever. But really quick, you had pointed out that for the first time in several seasons in the opening credits, Winterfell is not on fire and there is no boat and sigil there. It's back in Stark hands, and that was just really fun to see.
Yeah, Winterfell's restored to Starks. But there is still the Baratheon stag in the intro. I don't know why.
Gendry's still alive.
Yeah, Gendry. But is Gendry... What would his last name be? Gendry Storm?
Yeah.
No,
no.
He's from King's Landing. Gendry...
I don't remember.
Stone?
No, that's the Airy.
He's a bastard. Anyways. So, okay. So Davos calls out the Red Woman for burning Shireen and points out that it got them nowhere. So we were all scratching our heads at the power of King's blood and still scratching our heads at the power of King's blood. Oh, but Jon's now a king, which I hadn't thought of before. So maybe he's got some superpowers.
And she brought him back.
Right.
So...
But anyway, so Davos calls her out, and Jon banishes her to go away from Winterfell. Who do you think she's going to run into?
Well, probably Arya. I could see
either Arya or the Brotherhood Without Banners. It's got to be one of those two.
But I mean, she thinks that Jon is the prince that was promised. So I see her following and doing what she's got to do, like following his orders. But I also don't think she's going to go too far away. Yeah, because otherwise, what's her point to stay alive? You know, like what else is her purpose except for to do this? So that's why I think she's not going to go too far away.
She'll probably have some kind of redemption arc where she'll do, maybe saving him was part of her redemption, but also she is still alive and she claims that she's an important role against the White Walkers. So maybe she'll do something big yet to come. She's
less arrogant now.
Yeah. But one thing she has is a power to see danger to herself. So I don't think Arya can sneak up on her and kill her, even if she wanted to.
I did find it interesting that Jon let her live. Did he let her live because he brought her back? Or is this a way that they're showing that Jon's character has changed? Because I think the way that Eddard and Robb would have done and the old Jon would have done things was to kill her in that way. But I think now that Jon might be kind of coming around and realizing like even people you don't like or who deserve to be punished might have an important role to play in what's coming up and that he's willing to kind of set that aside. You know, the way that Robb couldn't do that with Lord Karstark, knowing that he would lose all the Karstarks if he beheaded him and things like that. So I liked seeing Jon let her live.
Yeah, it's hard to say. He had Alistair Thorne and everyone else hung or hanged, but he let her go. So it's hard to say where his ethics are drawn and what, if any, ramifications there's been of his revival. That's probably my single biggest criticism of this whole season is that Jon being brought back to life seems to have very little effects or ramifications or anything except that now he's alive again. But okay, so...
I was talking about this a little bit already here, but to go back with the Jon and Sansa kind of conflict potential here, there's this piece where, like you said, Jon did try to offer Sansa everything. And said, hey, you're a true-born Stark. We're only here because of you. And he offered to her, and she didn't take it, but she didn't not take it either. But she did go out of her way to say, hey, you are a Stark in my mind. So I really hope that she follows her own words and stays true to that. I mean, it comes down here, and I think we're going to see this next season. It's going to come down to what does Sansa want? If she goes away from the Starks, what does she have? Well, all she's got really is Littlefinger, and so she really better, like, that, and she would just have to want to be queen, which I haven't seen as part of Sansa's character. Like, she's not trying to play the Game of Thrones, so that would just be such a weird shift, but again, I really hope she stays loyal to the North and Jon, and because otherwise she'll just be like a female version of Littlefinger.
Yeah, she denied Littlefinger in the episode, but they did exchange a little look when Jon was being crowned King of the North. So that planted a little seed of doubt in us of where they're going to go and what they're going to do. Which
I can understand. It makes us not be entirely sure, which I like. I'm just saying they better not screw that up. And so I guess just to finish up with that, Sansa clearly says you'd be a fool if you trust Littlefinger. But even though she knows that, is that enough? Is she going to be able to withstand his influence? She already seemed influenced when she didn't tell Jon about the Knights of the Vale. So, you know, how much influence can he have even if someone does really know his game? And so now we have King of the North times 2. Jon, you said earlier in the podcast here that you didn't see that coming, and Jon has been made King of the North.
It looked very much like the ceremony with Robb, and he's King of the North, but he's not a Stark officially. And when we get to our spoilery section, I'll talk about how that could come about in the books. It seems hard that they would be supporting him as a bastard, even though he deserves it, even though they got their pep talk from the 10-year-old Lady Mormont. It's just so against the way that the society is set up.
Yeah, but at the same time, so much crap has happened at this point, and that, like, society still would probably prefer a male over a female, and as far as everyone knows, they've got Jon or Sansa, so I think that that's a piece, but, I think they want a Stark as their head, and Jon did ultimately prevail of how things worked out there. I mean, it's not like they're going to have someone from the Vale be King of the North, or the other houses that didn't support him, or House Mormont. So I do buy it. I think that, no, it wasn't likely in the times before, but given everything that's happened, I do think it's likely to happen now. And it was fun to see Jon finally get some legitimacy. I mean, I didn't see it coming either. And for a character who was dead at the beginning of the season, you know, to see him be where his father was, whom he loved his father so much. There's just this element of, well, look what happened to the last King of the North, so
that'll get us to the Tower of Joy scene, and the reason I'm bringing this up now is that I very much doubt it'll happen, but now that we know Jon and Sansa aren't brothers and sisters, maybe they'll be married, and that's how they'll be legitimized.
Oh, God, no.
Alright, so now we'll talk about the Tower of Joy scene, which is the big reveal about Jon's birth. And that'll lead us into our more spoilerish section of the podcast, where we're going to talk about different things of different characters that maybe show watchers haven't caught, who don't watch as closely as us, or people who haven't read the books, and just other things that the show has kind of purposely left out there or changed that might lead to some spoilers. So, Tower of Joy. We see that Ned was handed a little baby Jon Snow.
Yeah. R+L=J.
I was reading some threads on Facebook, and interestingly enough to me, there was still some debate over who the father was, at least in this particular group that I was reading from. So it was shown that Ned's sister Lyanna is the L, and R+L=J,
yeah,
which is the equation that is talked about on the internet to not give away too many spoilers. And so Jon is born of Lyanna, but then I saw these people talking about who the dad could be, and it just really reinforced how much I take for granted that we know that regular show watchers, like casual show watchers, just don't pay that much attention to. One person thought that the father might be the Mad King, and that got me to thinking, do show watchers even know who Rhaegar is? Because we've never seen Rhaegar in the show, and he's been talked about a handful of times, but I guess if you only watch the show, you don't go online, you don't read the books or anything like that, it's hard to think of characters that they've never shown.
Right. I will say, though, that the show has put out there that it could likely be Rhaegar, where it's been talked about that Rhaegar supposedly abducted Lyanna and took off with her and that sort of thing. And that's been mentioned several times.
Well, I think that this particular person thought that Rhaegar and the Mad King were the same person.
Well, and that's the one thing with Game of Thrones that I could fully understand. There are a ton of characters at play, and a lot of them die, and then new ones emerge. And so there's a lot to keep track of.
So Rhaegar is the Mad King, the one that Jaime killed because he was going to light the city on fire. The Mad King's son. His oldest son is Rhaegar Targaryen.
Dany's older brother.
And Dany and Dany's other brother, Viserys, are the younger siblings to Rhaegar. Rhaegar was killed by Robert Baratheon, who became the king after Robert's rebellion. And Robert started his rebellion because he believes that Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna, who he was in love with and was his betrothed. So he rose up in rebellion. That's part of it. Also, Ned's older brother rebelled at that same time, and he was killed by the Mad King, but we don't have to get into that.
And Ned's father.
And Ned's father, right. So Ned's brother and father were killed at the beginning of this. So anyways, Robert rose up, and he killed Rhaegar in a big battle of the Trident. They've talked about it. And Robert killed him. And then, while Robert was fighting him, Ned showed up at the Tower of Joy looking for his sister. And that's when they all fought Arthur Dayne, the double-sworded guy who kicked all their asses. And because Rhaegar put his best soldier to protect Lyanna while she gave birth to her child. So R+L=J is Rhaegar plus Lyanna equals Jon. Also in this thread, somebody thought R equaled Robert because they knew that Robert was in love with Lyanna, and so they thought Jon was a Baratheon. No, it's Rhaegar. And I don't know why they had her whisper a secret in his ear. Maybe their job is to keep us guessing about who the dad is. But whatever she whispered to him, I guess that left enough mystery for some people to not be sure. But anyway, so any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay, so we definitely know that it's Lyanna's kid from the scene. And I actually really enjoyed the fact that we didn't have her just say everything there. I think sometimes that's the beauty of good writing, is not just always handing things to you with the exact words, but giving you enough there, which I understand that there can be some confusing here, but I also think that the more that people come to know it and pay attention to certain things, that it will start to be more clear. And then, so I appreciate this scene, how it was done. I don't have criticism with it.
My only problem with that is that we're seeing this scene through Bran's eyes.
Right.
And Bran can see everything. So if he wanted to hear that whisper, he could. But anyways, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and so, like, just in terms of this, so, okay, if there is this question of, did she willingly go off with Rhaegar? Is he the father? That sort of thing. And my answer is yes. I think yes. And you already said one of the reasons why. Is Rhaegar left his best fighters, and not just Rhaegar's best fighters, but the best fighters in all of Westeros. Sir Arthur Dayne is legendary. And still, even to this day, at where the books are, he still probably would kick everybody's asses. He's like one of the best fighters that's ever lived. But some of the other Kingsguard that he left behind were also some of the best. He left his very best. And there's this whole thing where, like, somebody was saying, like, oh, I didn't see you at the Trident, or that sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, because he was ordered by Rhaegar to stay behind. Now, why would Rhaegar order them to stay behind? He already has children with Ilya Martell, so I don't think it's just because, Lyanna could have been pregnant or something. I actually think that there was a love there, and that she wanted to go with him. She was actually never abducted. And also, why would Lyanna, which this was clearly stated in the show, and this is all that we really get from the books in terms of what she told Ned, is please, Ned, promise me, Ned. And why would she ask Ned to protect him if he weren't Targaryen? So I guess that could make sense if it was the Mad King and that sort of thing. But, like, Ned wouldn't need to protect him if Robert was the father. Ned wouldn't need to protect him if just Lyanna was the mother. It's the fact that a Targaryen, and Robert was killing every Targaryen alive. And Lyanna knew that. And he was already doing that. And he even maintained that all throughout when we started watching the show, where he tried to have Dany killed. So I think that just really shows, yep, this is why she's asking him to protect him.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, if it were Robert's child, she didn't know who was going to win between Rhaegar and Robert. So the logic could have applied either way. If it was Robert's child and the Targaryens won the battle, and then they found out that it was a Baratheon kid or whatever.
But then why would Rhaegar leave his best fighters back to protect her? I mean, those fighters were willing to kill Ned and all those guys coming to get her. Why would Rhaegar do that if she was pregnant with Robert's child?
Yeah, no, it's Rhaegar. I was surprised that there was debate over it, but again, we maybe take a little too much for granted as people who have invested some substantial chunks of our lives into reading and watching this stuff. So the ramifications of Jon being a Targaryen are pretty huge.
I mean, other than the fact that he's Dany's nephew and he's actually cousins with the Stark children, he is part Targaryen.
Right, and not only that, but he has a better claim to the throne than Dany does, but because the Mad King was king, the next in line was Rhaegar, and the next in line below that is Rhaegar's children, who are all dead except for Jon. So he has a better claim than Dany, for what it's worth. I don't know if that'll even come into play. That also, his Targaryen blood makes us wonder about his relation to dragons. And will he have any kind of special power that Dany has with dragons? Which I guess we have every reason to think that he will.
Right, or that at least there's possibility.
So there's 3 dragons, and Dany rides one. And there's a big if Jon rides another, that's 2 dragon riders, and there's a 3rd dragon. And we suspect we know who the 3rd rider is. So really, people, if you don't want spoilers here, turn it off now, because we're going to spoil some shit, I think. So, Kate, who do you think is the 3rd rider?
I think it's Tyrion. And I've actually said this in a previous podcast, and Jay edited me out. And not that, like, I've come up with this, not at all, but I think what clinched it for me for Tyrion could possibly be a Targaryen was this season in the show when he set the other 2 dragons free, and his ability to do that.
Right, on its face, that seemed almost like a pointless scene.
And you criticize it, like,
right.
What was the whole point of that? And I think maybe they're setting it up for this later on.
Right. The dragons did not feel threatened by him.
Well, and he was able to do it, right. And so, like, there's a couple other potential clues. And again, this is just a theory out there. Well, they did do this in the show as well, but also in the books. He's got this obsession with dragons since he was a young child. And so this could possibly explain that obsession. And then in the books, he's Peter Dinklage doesn't have this in the show, but in the books he's got mismatched eye color, and his hair is also described as not the typical Lannister blonde. It's like more whitish in color of how it's described.
Which we commented in our last podcast that his hair is getting darker and darker in the show. Maybe we're wrong, or maybe the show isn't going to go that way, or maybe they're just trying to really make it not obvious.
Well, and there's one last thing I can add to this, is that it's been said many times in the show and in the books when Tywin was alive is, "You are not my son, you are not my son."
Yeah.
And back in this day and age, in such a big house like the Lannisters, and especially who Tywin Lannister was, if his wife was pregnant by someone else, how could he prove it wasn't him? So when she gave birth to Tyrion, he said that the reason why Tyrion lived was because he was a Lannister, even though he was a dwarf in that time where a lot of other people would not have kept a dwarf child. But Tywin also couldn't just be like, "No, you're not my child because I just don't want it." He couldn't prove it wasn't his.
Yeah, and Tywin even said that. He said, "I couldn't prove you weren't mine, so that's why I didn't leave you out in the ocean like I was planning." And then on his death toilet, he said, "You're no son of mine," and Tyrion said, "I am your son," and then that was that.
Right.
So there's some very subtle clues there in the show, and
the same subtlety though that was also there with Lyanna and Rhaegar and possibly Jon. Maybe that was less subtle, but it wasn't overt with it. But there's little clues there, and Martin likes to do that.
Yeah, and then in the books, I can't remember who we got this from. Maybe Barristan Selmy or maybe somebody else. But the story is that the Mad King always had the hots for Joanna Lannister, who was Tywin's wife. So whether he forced her to do stuff or however it may have happened, that would make Tyrion the son of the Mad King and Tywin's wife, which would actually put Tyrion at the top of the claimants to the Iron Throne. Right? So he'd be equal to Rhaegar, who's dead, but he would be the son of the Mad King. So that's...
Well, I guess it could get confusing, because if we follow that, it would be the Mad King and then Rhaegar, and if Rhaegar has kids, then it's still Jon.
No, because the Mad King's son is Tyrion. So Jon's no more legitimate than Tyrion is.
Well, I think it doesn't matter how many second sons there are, that if the firstborn son has sons. So, for example, in England right now, Prince Harry will never be king unless all of Prince William's. And, Prince William is still after
I got it. Stannis
Charles.
wasn't king because Robert's kids were there.
Yes.
So, right, they weren't his kids, but if they were, right, I got it.
Yes.
You're right.
So I think that Tyrion may be the third dragon rider. I mean, that's just assuming that we have 3 dragon riders. There were 3 dragon riders when the original Targaryens came over and conquered Westeros. Now we've got Dany, who's clearly a dragon rider, and she's got 3 dragons. So these could be the people setting up to be the 3 dragon riders. Those are my guesses.
Yeah, they're the 3 most important characters in the book, so it would be not surprising at all. I kind of hope it's not the case, just... As a fan, I kind of get sick of it that the Targaryens are so special, and I kind of just don't want everything to be about this mysterious Targaryen
special
blood
with a price, because they're also known to be quite crazy and not great rulers. So,
well, right, but if Dany, Jon, and Tyrion, the 3 most important people in the whole story, are all Targaryen.
Which, and one of my things, I guess just to go back, the whole series is called A Song of Ice and Fire, and I think one of the ways to think about it is that Jon is Targaryen and Stark, you got ice and fire.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of ways to take the ice and fire and stuff, but there is a piece of this, though, that I'm really interested to see what happens. When Jon, I'm assuming, will find this out from Bran, and, are he and Dany going to get along, or is he going to be a way to kind of calm this Targaryen wrath that can happen? Are they going to fight each other? Are they going to get along? I'm really interested to see that.
Yeah, and I mentioned Jon marrying Sansa earlier, and I was saying it mostly jokingly, but Jon Targaryen marrying Daenerys Targaryen would not be odd at all. They don't know each other, and they're cousins, and the Targaryens have always intermarried.
Well, she's his aunt.
Right, yeah. But the Targaryens have always intermarried like that. So, who knows? I definitely see a romance brewing between Jon and Dany at some point. Dany left all her boyfriend at home for this one, and Jon doesn't have anybody, so... Or they could fight. Jon is in the north with the ice, and Dany's in the south with the fire, and that's part of the Song of Ice and Fire. So now that he's got a kingdom to rule over, and if she's an invader...
It's also kind of interesting now because of his love that he had with Ygritte, and that she had hair, that she was kissed by fire, and here's this connection to that again. And
Right.
I'm reminded of a scene actually when Aemon was still alive where he was saying there's like where they were talking about Dany and he's actually like, oh, there's nothing worse than a Targaryen all alone or something like that. And then all of a sudden Jon walks into the room.
Yeah. So talking about Jon, so we got all that. So now let's talk about the King of the North.
Well, the last thing I will just say with the Tower of Joy scene in this is I really appreciated the acting on the actor who played Ned Stark. Not only did they have the same kind of like dialect of the way that they talked, but I really appreciate the emotion in the scene because in the books, Ned was very close to his sister and cared so much about her, and I felt like that really came through in this scene of their relationship and the love that they had. And when it comes to family, Ned was willing to sacrifice honor for family, and so this is when he did it again for his nephew Jon, and I just really enjoyed that.
For a guy that's all about honor, he was willing to live a lie for a couple decades about him birthing some kid.
And my last question with it is clearly there was other people present at the birth, and this was like a huge secret to be kept. So what about those people who were present? How did they get them to be quiet about who Jon was?
Yeah. Speaking of that young guy who played Ned Stark, I'd love it if after Game of Thrones was over, they did a whole series on Robert's Rebellion.
That would be cool.
Yeah, that would be really cool, but I don't see it happening. I mean, one, we already know how the story turns out, but two, it would be a huge production, but it would be pretty cool to see all these guys in the younger roles leading up to everything that happened here.
But they did something actually similar with Spartacus when their main actor was diagnosed with cancer, and to try and give some time, they actually did a prequel, even though we knew how it was going to turn out, and that was pretty badass. So, I think there's room for it. I just think you're right. It's just, it'd be a huge production, but I think if the right person came forward with it, that HBO would greenlight it.
Yeah, the story's already there. If they just did like 10 or 20 episodes, that'd be great. But anyways, okay, so anything else about Jon Targaryen and the Tower of Joy and all that stuff?
No, I think that's that's a lot.
Yeah. And then, so the last thing I just want to say about Jon is that he has been crowned King of the North, and I talked about in the regular podcast how it was a little bit hard for me to see in this society where bloodlines and names and all that stuff means so much that they would crown Jon Snow, but maybe it'll happen just like that in the books. But one thing that's been left out of the show that is in the books is discussion over if Robb legitimized Jon in his will. Because Robb and Jon were always tight. And there's one discussion in the books where Robb is talking about legitimizing Jon, and Catelyn, Robb's mother, is very much against it because she's afraid it would lead to a divided house and some kind of civil war or something like that. So there is some debate about whether he did actually legitimize him, and somewhere there's a will floating around that will get back to Jon and make him eligible to be the proper head of the Winterfell. Part of what I rest my Game of Thrones predictive credibility on is my long-standing prediction that Stannis will defeat the Boltons in the battle for Winterfell, which he did not do in the show. But it's hard for me to see that happening and Jon being crowned King of the North, because Stannis and Jon are relatively tight, and Stannis wouldn't allow one of the Seven Kingdoms to not be in the Seven. So my prediction could be wrong. It seems to be getting wronger with every episode that went by this year.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe the books will be different. I mean, clearly Stannis has to go at some point. It's just how.
Right, yeah, exactly. And in my full podcast dedicated to Stannis, I explain why I think he'll win the battle. But one of the big reasons is that the Iron Bank approaches him and offers him support after he's already on his way to Winterfell, which is just so much different than in the books. So George R. R. Martin has made a big deal out of thinking about the economics of these kind of wars and things like that, and he's even criticized Tolkien for not talking about money and things like that in Lord of the Rings. So he's making the Iron Bank a pretty big deal, and the fact that they are backing Stannis is a pretty big deal. The Economist puts out occasional articles about Game of Thrones, and they were talking about that too, because they understand, how important it is to have these moneylenders on your side. If Stannis does defeat the Boltons, it makes it all the way to King's Landing, and Cersei is in charge there, like in the show. So there's this prophecy about Stannis dying with a crown of fire on his head. So he basically knows that being king will burn him alive. And I always assumed it would be Dany showing up and burning him with the dragons. But maybe he'll make it to King's Landing and be burned by Cersei's wildfire. So who knows?
Or he could be burned by a Bolton on the next.
Yeah, no, that could be. But
but that would suck.
That would break your heart.
But so that leads me to talk about Cersei, though, which is what I wanted to talk about, and the Maggie the Frog prophecy. So in the beginning of last season, we got the prophecy about Cersei, where she was told that all 3 of her kids would die, which has indeed come true, and she knew it would come true. She told Jaime about it, and the quote goes like this: "Queen you shall be until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and take all that you hold dear." So that's part of the prophecy. She had been thinking that was Marjorie. That's why she hated her so much, but we think it must be Dany, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's Dany. I guess there's a chance because, especially of how the season ended, that there's a lot of women's empowerment, a lot of potential would-be queens that maybe we just don't see yet. Like, Dany's the obvious choice at this point, which again is who I think it is, but, what if it gets to be someone else?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, seems to me, it's got to be Dany, but the sequence of it seems a little weird to me because the prophecy says, "Until another comes, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and take all that you hold dear." So I wonder if in the books it'll play out like the show, because all that you hold dear until this point had been her children who have been declining. Now, all that she holds dear is, I guess, just being a queen.
Right, power.
So that might be that. We've talked about Varys and who he's supporting in the books. Varys is supporting a character named Aegon Targaryen, who may or may not be the son of Rhaegar. My point in saying Tommen died and then Cersei became queen. But in the books, between Stannis and this maybe Aegon, there's 2 more stronger blood claims to the throne than Cersei.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So I'm not sure that anyone in King's Landing would bother to crown her rather than go to one of these other 2 claimants who actually have...
I don't think she cares, though. Like, she's clearly playing the Game of Thrones, and she's not only playing it just so that she can marry the next king.
Well, right, but this is the big philosophical question in Game of Thrones is, where does power reside, right? So
I think to Cersei, it's she who knows where the wildfire is and her Lannister army, which I think you and I can say isn't enough, but I think I could see Cersei thinking that.
Well, and Cersei also, she does think that. She thinks that power resides in people who can order other people around. But then Littlefinger, I think it was, makes the point, or maybe it was Varys makes the point that power resides where people think it resides. So basically it comes down to the people in King's Landing, would they think that Cersei is a legitimate person to be crowned, or would they turn to Stannis or Aegon, who actually have the blood, to be crowned?
Yeah, but I think the people in King's Landing in that sense don't matter as much. It's more who are the noble houses back.
Right. Yeah. So we'll see. I suspect it won't play out like in the books like it did in the show, but maybe it will. Either way, Cersei on the crown is scary. But the more important part of the prophecy is what's called the Valonqar prophecy, which goes like this: When your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar shall wrap his hands about your pale white throat and choke the life from you. So Valonqar in Valyrian language means little brother. Mm-hmm. So according to this prophecy, Cersei will be strangled to death by a little brother. Mm-hmm. So we know for certain she has 2 little brothers. One is Tyrion, who she has assumed was always this person, and that's why she hates him.
Yeah.
But then we also know that her twin Jaime came out just after she did.
Right.
So he fits the prophecy, and seems to make much more sense to have Jaime be the Valonqar.
I agree. And just to note, I'm pretty sure that this was not, it hasn't been shown in the show yet. We only saw the first half of the prophecy where it says that she'll be queen and she's going to have 3 kids and they're all going to die. Like, gold will be their crowns and gold will be their shrouds. So that's happened. But the show hasn't shown the Valonqar piece. But the books, I think it's a major plot point. I would be surprised if the show doesn't bring it in at some point. And I hope that they do, especially since I think it will be a significant thing. And I think it's Jaime.
Yeah, I think they left it out of the show because it would be too obvious who it was.
And too early for it.
Right.
Because they still, like he and Cersei have to go through something, I think. Like, what they're going through now in order for that, I think, to flow with the show. So I understand why they haven't done it yet, and I think it's okay.
There is some speculation out there that Valonqar's little brother doesn't have to mean her little brother. Mm. It certainly seems to make the most sense from a storytelling point of view, but it could theoretically be any little brother in a Game of Thrones.
Yeah, the reason why I like it for Jaime is because the books and the show have worked hard to show that he's not just like a one-dimensional character the way that Cersei almost pretty much is, with the exception of like her being like this mother who just is so devoted to her kids, who she's now lost that. Where Jaime, we see so many different pieces where like he actually killed the king to save King's Landing, which no one really saw that. They just assumed that he wanted to become king, or, you know, his relationship with Brienne and a lot of what happened there. And so, like, I could just see it of, like, how he's loved Cersei so much, and that whole monologue that he had to the River and
his discussion with Edmure.
With Edmure Tully, yeah. His whole discussion with Edmure of what he would do to get back to her. And I remember people were like, this isn't Jaime. This isn't how he's like in the books. And I'm wondering if the show is just trying to make some contrast for this. Because, like, if he kills Cersei, he still is going to love her at the same time.
Yeah. There is a couple problems, though, with this theory of Jaime doing it. Well, at least for the show. For one thing, it says, and when your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar shall wrap his hands around your pale neck. So basically, Cersei, now that all of her children gone, have almost nothing left to cry about. So I think in the books, if Jaime or anyone else strangles her, it'll be immediately or pretty shortly after her third child is killed. She'll probably lose her third child and then blow up something with wildfire, and then Jaime or whoever else will strangle her. That's just pure speculation based on the way I'm reading this. So the sequence of events will probably be different.
Yeah, although who knows? Maybe there's a yet unknown reason that could make Cersei cry.
Maybe she'll cry because Jaime's betraying her, you know. And then the other big one is that it does say hands plural, and Jaime only has one hand.
Well, one real hand. He does have a gold
hand.
Right,
having a gold hand. So I guess with Lannister being choked by a gold hand would be really ironic.
But I wouldn't put it past George R. R. Martin to do something like that.
Yeah. So for all you show watchers, we just ruined a bunch of stuff for you, but I gave you fair warning.
Well, if we're right.
If we're right. Which I think.
And again, it's not like we're coming up with a lot of this stuff. It's just stuff that we've been exposed to and think that could fit.
Right. Okay. Anything else spoilery that we want to talk about?
I think that's all the main ones.
All right, so I just want to thank everyone for listening. I wanted to start this podcast a while back just to give me something new to do and to get me thinking about different topics and researching different topics, and I didn't really intend to immediately turn it into a completely Game of Thrones podcast. But that's where it's gone, and I've gotten a lot of really good feedback from listeners who have sent me text messages or commented on Facebook and stuff like that. And this particular episode has gotten out a little late, and I've gotten a surprising amount of people asking why it's taken so long. So I'm really appreciative.
We have more than 9 listeners?
Or
you do?
No, we do a few more. Going forward, I suppose non-Game of Thrones stuff will mostly be just me.
I'll listen to a few of yours.
Okay. But anyways, yeah, so I just want to thank the people who have taken the time to listen to these. These are really long-form episodes, and I've been pretty happy with the response. I wasn't really expecting anything. So just so everyone knows, we're not waiting a whole year for next Game of Thrones. I will be podcasting about other things. All right, thanks.